Welcome back to Act on Mental Health. In this video, we're going to be diving into the Hexaflex model, which is the foundation of acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. Now, who am I? I'm Shaun Hardie, and I'm a licensed mental health counselor based in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And I love sharing about what I've learned about ACT on my channel, Act on Mental Health. Now, the videos in this playlist are designed to be more comprehensive on the ACT model and designed for mental health professionals and graduate students, or those that are wanting a deeper knowledge of ACT as a potential therapeutic modality. So just want to prepare you for what's in store in this video and the ones that follow. So feel free to fast forward to the section that is most relevant to you. Now, this video is broken down into 3 sections: the problem that ACT solves, the cognitive scientific theory that ACT uses, called Relational Frame Theory, or RFT, and the evolutionary science behind the ACT model. For more resources, make sure to check out my website, shaunhardie.com, and also the ACT training manual, Learning ACT, by Jason Newman, Stephen Hayes, and Robin Walzer. Also, this would be a great time to hit the like button and subscribe, and comment below and tell me about where you are in your ACT journey. So let's start with the problem that ACT solves, and then we'll get into more on the ACT model. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. That quote perfectly captures the essence of what ACT calls psychological inflexibility, the core of human unhappiness and many mental health struggles. People often get stuck in patterns of behavior that clearly aren't working, yet they keep doing the same thing over and over, hoping for different results. Psychologists have recognized this for decades, and it was once called the neurotic paradox, the strange inability to try something different even when the current approach is clearly making things worse. Sounds like somebody you know? Sounds a lot like me. And Mobs Mabley nailed it. Psychological inflexibility is the enemy of improvement. But here's where ACT helps. ACT doesn't just point out that inflexibility is a problem, it digs down deep into why it happens and, most importantly, what to do about it. At the center of this analysis is something that we rely on every day: language. Now, language is both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it's what allows us to problem solve, communicate, and build connections. But on the other hand, the same verbal skills that help us to thrive can also trap us in rumination, avoidance, and self-judgments. ACT's approach is unique because it doesn't just ask us to stop using language. That's impossible. Instead, it teaches us to relate to our thoughts and verbal experiences in healthier, more flexible ways. Let's explore this by using a feared scenario. I want you to imagine this. You wake up completely in an unfamiliar room, and the exits are locked, and you have no idea how you got there. What's the first thing that you do? You'd probably start thinking through the situation, right? You'd ask, how did I get here? Or, what's the way out? Maybe you could use your phone to call for help. But you'd also wonder, what if somebody's watching? You might consider kicking the door down or shouting for help, but hesitate, thinking, what if that makes things worse? Using only your thoughts, you'd weigh options, predict outcomes, and choose plans that seem the safest. You'd figure it out. Now, this problem-solving ability is an incredible human strength, and it's what allowed us to think ahead, plan, and adapt. And it's why humans, despite being the slower and weaker animals, have taken over the planet. But here's the catch. This strength can turn into a weakness when it's used in the wrong places. Now imagine a different kind of trap. Not a locked room, but a feeling of intense anxiety or doom. You wake up with it, and your brain goes into overdrive, thinking, why am I feeling this way? How do I stop it? And it's the same problem-solving approach, only now it's focused on your emotions instead of the external world. Now it's logical, right? But here's the problem. What works in the physical world, like fixing a broken door, can backfire in the emotional world. Let's say you don't like peeling paint on a wall. You scrape it off and repaint it. But what if you try to scrape away a painful memory or feeling? Instead of disappearing, it might become more vivid and central to your life. This is why we often get stuck. If we fear rejection, we might avoid relationships altogether, thinking we're protecting ourselves. But in reality, that avoidance makes rejection even more powerful in our lives. The harder that we try to escape certain thoughts or feelings, the more that they seem to grow. Unlike escaping a locked room, escaping a painful emotion doesn't always work. In fact, research shows that trying to suppress emotions can make them stronger and more persistent. And we can't just leave our history behind us like we would leave a physical space. Our feelings, our thoughts, and memories travel with us wherever we go. So, what's the solution? Well, it starts with understanding that human language, this amazing tool that helps us solve external problems, isn't always useful when applied to internal struggles. Language is a double-edged sword. It's the source of many of our strengths, but it's also the reason that we get stuck. And that's where ACT comes in. ACT builds on behavioral and evolutionary principles to help us use language and cognition more effectively. It's grounded in something called Relational Frame Theory, or RFT, which explains how we create meaning and how our thoughts influence our actions. So here's a quick way to think about RFT, and it's summed up in just a few lines. Learn it in one, derive it in two, put it in networks that change what you do. It's a powerful framework, and it's the foundation for all the processes that we'll explore in the Hexaflex model. But first, let's take a closer look at relational frame theory, or RFT, and how it explains the role of language in shaping our experiences and actions. A toddler learns that the object in front of them is called an apple. Soon, when they hear the word apple, they instinctively look for that object. No one explicitly teaches them this reverse connection. It's a natural skill that we humans develop. In this case, they've learned the relation in one direction, seeing the apple and hearing its name, and derive it in the other, hearing its name and thinking of the object. This mutual relation forms the foundation of language, giving names to things. This basic ability to name objects likely started not with individuals, but within the human tribes. Humans, unlike other primates, are uniquely cooperative, a trait that gives tribes a survival advantage. Think about early humans. Calling across the ravine for an apple allowed them to share resources and strengthen group bonds. This verbal exchange didn't work for that instant, but allowed vast networks of meaning to develop so that humans could work together cooperatively. Now here's where it gets interesting. Even young children naturally build these networks. For example, a child who learns that apple in English is jabuka in Croatian can immediately connect these words, jabuka and apple. They can also imagine what jabuka juice might even taste like, even though they'd never had it. Now, this is the essence of the RFT phrase, learn it in one, drive it in two, put it in networks that change what you do. These networks extend far beyond basic naming. We'll take another example. Small children, before they understand the value of money, might get upset if they give them a dime instead of a nickel because the nickel is bigger. But as language develops, they learn that a dime is actually worth more than a nickel, even though it's smaller, and they can adjust their preferences accordingly. Here's the catch. That value isn't based on the coins themselves. It's an arbitrary rule created by social convention. This ability to derive meaning beyond physical reality is a powerful feature of human language, but it can also trap us. Let's consider this phrase. Skinny is better than fat. The relational cue, better than, in this statement feels similar to something else like an elephant is bigger than a mouse, but there's a critical difference, isn't there? The size relationship between the elephant and the mouse is based on observable reality, while the better than relationship between skinny and fat is entirely arbitrary, created by social or cultural training. The problem is we tend to treat these verbal relationships as though they're inherent truths. The more that these relational networks expand, the more that we live in a world structured by language rather than direct experience. This is where we can get stuck in culturally or socially derived ways of thinking that aren't always chosen or even helpful. RFT shows us how language works behind the scenes to structure our world, shaping how we think, feel, and act. And it does this so seamlessly that we rarely even notice it's happening. ACT works to demystify the illusion that our minds create that might sound a little similar to the Wizard of Oz. You remember that scene where Toto pulls back the curtain, revealing the ordinary man operating this great and powerful Oz? The wizard thunders, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. But of course, we can't unsee the truth. That's what ACT does. It helps us to pull back the curtain on how our minds work, revealing that what we think of as the mind isn't a thing at all. It's just a set of relational abilities, our capacity to think, plan, judge, evaluate, and remember. Here's the thing. These abilities have a light and dark side, and the difference lies in how, when, and where we use them. Literal language and cognition are tools, but they're not the right tools for every situation. Relational Frame Theory, RFT, has given us a powerful insight into how language develops and why it's both a help and a hindrance. More importantly, it offers us guidance on how to rein in the excesses of language so that we can use it more effectively rather than being controlled by it. This brings us to the last line of the RFT ditty. Put it in networks that change what you do. From an evolutionary perspective, change requires 6 things: variation, context, selection, retention, level of organization, and dimension. Let's break that down in a practical way. First, intentional change requires variation, trying different actions to see what works. But it's not enough to try random things. We need to pay attention to context and choose actions that fit that situation. Once we find that something works, we need selection and retention to reinforce and repeat those successful behaviors. We also have to consider the level of organization. For example, a cancer cell might thrive as an individual unit, but its success is harmful to the larger organism. Similarly, an action might be right for an individual, but it could harm a relationship or a team. Finally, we need to think about dimension. Success in one area, like excelling in work, could come at the expense of something else, like sleep or relationships. A multidimensional view helps us to ensure progress in one domain doesn't sabotage another. From this perspective, symbolic relations, our thoughts, emotions, and psychological events, become a problem when they restrict healthy variation, disconnect us from the present, block positive action, or interfere with retaining gains. In other words, the mind's dark side shows up when it limits our ability to adapt and grow. ACT rises to this challenge by helping us to expand our awareness, align our values with our actions, and use language and cognition flexibly. By doing so, we can take control of the changes that we want to make, intentionally and sustainably. Relational Frame Theory, or RFT, forms the foundation for understanding the processes that ACT identifies as leading to human suffering. Now, at the heart of it is this: literal language, the way that we think, analyze, and interpret the world, plays a huge role in amplifying pain. Language encourages us to avoid or escape uncomfortable feelings, get entangled in our thoughts, lose touch with the present moment, and cling to rigid stories about ourselves and others. For example, we might think, I can't handle this anxiety, and that thought alone can spiral into avoidance behaviors that can make the situation worse. From an evolutionary perspective, this overextension of language reduces our flexibility. Instead of adapting to our internal and external environments, we end up stuck in rigid patterns that don't serve us. The things we truly care about, our values, goals, and meaningful actions, fade into the background as we focus on trying to eliminate discomfort. In ACT, we call this psychological inflexibility, and it's a set of processes that create or worsen the human condition. These dynamics, like avoidance, fusion, losing touch with values, are the root of unhappiness, and this is precisely what ACT targets. The goal of ACT is to replace this inflexibility with psychological flexibility, the ability to respond to life's challenges with openness, adaptability, and actions aligned with your values. Now that you know the theories on which ACT is based, you're ready for an advanced overview of each of the 6 core processes. And what I'd like to do is to start with the inflexibility processes. So if you're ready to continue, click the next video in our series, Learning ACT, as we learn what these 6 processes of inflexibility are. Thank you for joining me, and remember, your journey towards a more purposeful and mindful life begins with a single click.